The YouTuber I'm going to survey today is Marcus Follin, more known as the Golden One. A bombastic guy who promotes a questionable traditionalist ideology and teaching that he frivolously calls enlightened wisdom or taking the glorious pill. And sometimes he claims it is paganism. The essence of his teaching can be boiled down to improve yourself for a higher purpose and become a valiant champion of modern Europe. And the general means to achieve this he sums up in the following 5 points. Train in the Temple of Iron, meaning the gym. Train MMA or some other martial art. Read something every day, articles or books. Try to learn something new or get better at something every day. And do not watch porn, do not get drunk, do not do drugs. So how well does this guy, his teaching, worldview and advice stack up with timeless principles?
But first and foremost, we have to win the hearts and minds of the population. And that is done by getting them to identify as who they are.
For those who have experiences with human types, we can tell pretty quickly that Marcus Follin is a magnitudinem type. The type that tends to value ideals and abstract greatness above compassion or freedom to be natural. This gives us an idea where his blind spots are as an individual. And that is part of the reason why timeless education employs this map of partial man. If this guy is as enlightened as he claims, he will have balanced having an ideal with compassion and naturalness, not to mention giving up any notion of identity in order to become receptive and fulfilled. Yet he is not off to a good start, since he models himself based on external influences he originally was not, appears contrived, does not come off as natural in his videos, and is also attached to his racial identity, to an abstract and archaic concept of Europe, and to the physical body and his muscles.
So that is the first step, to get people to identify as I am part of this particular culture. And then after they've begun to identify as something, then you can start talking about, what challenges we are facing. Because if they are only focusing on their own personal challenges, they have mortgages to pay, they have children to take care of, they have a lot of things in their personal life. So they probably view themselves as completely separate from the nation or the civilization or the tribe. But if you can reignite that sense of who they are, then we are in a different situation when we talk about these sort of things. And obviously talking about getting all these people to identify as Europeans or white in America, for example, then you have to present an attractive image. And who am I? I'm the eternal champion of Mother Europe. XOXO. Boom! Greetings, you proud sons of Macedon.
This puts into question what his ideal really is, since improving yourself must be measured against an objective yardstick that does not strive against reality. In fact, the ideal should always be reality, to sync up more with reality, or with the principles of ultimate reality, and there is no such metaphysics presented in the Golden One's teaching, except some vague appeal to tradition, which is not useful, since tradition can be interpreted in any number of ways. Since the core principles of timeless education came first, they, if anything, should be regarded as tradition. But as we know, tradition has rarely been followed, and examples of tradition from the past 2000 years are not good examples of perennial tradition. The Golden One is not a good philosopher, but more like an eccentric or bizarre showman. What's interesting about that, however, is that the Golden One is clearly an introvert. Almost none of his values are taken from the prevailing cultural norms, and he will not bend to please his followers either. This is why introverts don't move the crowd or the public very well, and in this case it's probably a good thing. Because the Golden One wants something, which makes his advice to young men a form of manipulation. It is not their best interest he truly has in mind, although that's how he sells it. Neither is it what's best for the people of Europe or anywhere else that he has in mind. Rather, what he wants is for people to subject themselves to an ideal, to do what he wants, what an abstract authority wants. He wants people to change, to build their bodies, not discover or accept who they are or were born to be. He encourages people to shame others by using words like cuck, degenerate, and beta-leftist, which is not true compassion or loving one's people or neighbor. Because even if the person changed themselves and adopted the Golden One's cultural ideal, then what the Golden One and his followers would love is still mainly the culture in the person, not the actual human being. With that, I'm not saying he's completely without genuine compassion, but his love for others is significantly weaker than his love of ideals, and thus not enough to justify the claim of enlightenment and wisdom. Although he has said that he accepts what he calls degenerate elements as long as they don't infiltrate the mainstream, he has also said that he wants a massive cultural change to reverse the sexual revolution and discourage thinking of sex outside of marriage. And this makes him appear like a wolf in sheep's clothing, with an ideal of authoritarian oppression that ultimately wants to control even what people think. And in a rather twisted and perverted way, he is sort of framing this ideal as something that is natural, something that is the true European, and that people as they are right now is degenerate and unnatural. In this way, he, like most ethno-nationalists, demonizes and blames people for being what they are. The problem with racial identity is that people within each race are still just as different from one another that you cannot pinpoint a common essence to any race beyond culture. But the problem with culture and cultural identity is that culture tends to be artificial and a form of hypnotization that, if anything, creates unnatural or contrived human beings, where those who can't fit in with the norms tend to suffer. And this is not even mentioning the fact that culture is continuously changing trends, fashion, and evolving. But the most important thing is to understand that any identification to begin with is a form of pathology that makes you lose out on life, because all that you can point at is continuously changing or deteriorating. Only that core awareness, from which you observe your entire life, is what remains unchanging. And if anything is your true identity, if any part of you is immortal or golden, it is only this part. And thus that awareness is the only part that's worthy of your identity. Everything else leads to suffering. So he does not teach naturalness and authenticity. He does not teach relational competence and compassion. He does not give the credit for his achievements to creational causality, not even to the gods. And thus his pagan or spiritual practice is not authentic, since he does not make sacrifice in this way. And this type of sacrifice, to not take credit for one's acts, to not blame others for theirs, is a pretty vital component of enlightenment, and is the true meaning of humility. Also, he often uses the terms blasphemous and heretical, which is Jewish and not pagan. And for someone who loves the ideal, especially abstract greatness belonging to the past or dreams of the future, it is of course difficult to love the available and ordinary. Despite that, he will sometimes mention humility and appreciation of what you already have as small snippets of wisdom, so he does not completely fall short on that one. In fact, if he really is seeking wisdom and enlightenment, we should expect him to get some points right. But until we fully understand that the inner observer is our true self, and the aim of wisdom, self-improvement and enlightenment, we are not qualified to play the master. In the language of Norse spirituality, Odin can only watch the world when this is achieved. Odin, of course, represents the observing self, and the world represents order to the subconscious mind, a stable ground to stand on. Hence the immense value and importance of self-knowledge for a sane culture and personal health. This is not only missing from his teaching, but as I said, his focus on racial identity and other forms of identification distracts even more from the center of who we are to the peripheral and increases mental attachments and thus suffering and frustration. Yet he claims that people are unhappy because they are not part of something greater. People are unhappy because they are not truly living. They hide who they are and are not present in the moment, and this results in a lack of substance, which people then attempt to substitute with drugs, entertainment, dreams, and being part of something greater. But it is all fantasy that replaces actual living, actual being. All the Golden One attempts to do is replacing one substitute for reality with another. Instead of porn, you can have a fair maiden, the fantasy of an ideal woman that really don't exist. Instead of alcohol and drugs, you can have the ecstasy of glory in fighting for a Europa of the remote past. The lack of being present, natural and receptive, of living right now, feeds this kind of thirst for illusions. And whatever real problems we are facing in society, more focus on being rather than doing is what we need for societal sanity. Also, excessively training your body is futile when it will eventually decay anyway. And the amount of food you need to consume in order to grow that kind of muscles is not healthy for the environment in general, since we really need to consume less of everything than we already do. Keeping your body healthy is not unimportant, but training in the gym is far from essential. Awareness of what you eat and what the food does to your body is most important. Otherwise it can look like a serious compensation for something, or that you need to look intimidating because you live in a world of criminality. So on what level of consciousness is Marcus at? He is blind and ignorant, but not so blind that he belongs on the lowest level. As a sapientium type, it is natural that he would have quite a bit of skeptic consciousness, and for sure he does not go along with social conventions the way an extrovert would. At the same time, he's more trying to please the crowd and be more appealing to the general population than other nationalists, which makes him similar to the showman or politician. So he also has a lot of charm consciousness, and in fact his somewhat shallow thinking and focus on appearance, despite what he claims, makes me inclined to place him at level 5 rather than level 4. And of course level 5 corresponds to what the ancients refer to as mammalian nature, and does not count as genuine human nature, but rather animal nature. Certainly Marcus does not have divine nature, the nature of the enlightened. Instead of taking his glorious pill, people should take the timeless pill.